So we're in the midst of a huge scandal in American sport. Jon Gruden, one of the most well-known names in American football, stepped down Monday as coach of the Las Vegas Raiders football team, just hours after the New York Times detailed emails in which he'd made homophobic, misogynistic and racist remarks. He was a Super Bowl winner back in 2003, went on to become one of the biggest analysts on ESPN for almost a decade, and then back at the Las Vegas Raiders as head coach for the last couple of years, a 10-year, $100 million contract, the highest paid coach in the league. To talk about this, we're joined by Kavitha Davidson in The Athletic. Good evening, Kavitha.
Hello, thank you for having me.
For those of us here in Ireland, I outlined there just exactly who Jon Gruden was, but you might tell us just how big a name he was in American sport.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't just, the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. He, as you said, was for a time the face of ESPN's NFL coverage, of their Monday Night Football coverage. He was the highest paid personality at ESPN for a number of years. And when he moved back into the coaching ranks, he was just, when he left the Raiders, in the middle of a 10-year, $100 million contract. So we are talking about somebody who was kind of the golden boy of sorts, definitely the face of the league to a lot of people.
There are so many different strands to this that have already emerged over the last few days. How did all this originally come out? How was Jon Gruden outed as this type of figure?
Yeah, so the first report we got was a few days ago from the Wall Street Journal. I believe it was Saturday or Sunday. And the Wall Street Journal had uncovered a couple of emails in which he had disparaged NFLPA, the union's executive director, DeMaurice Smith. He called him Dumb Morris, which is clever, and made fun of the size of his lips, which is a very old racist trope that exists, especially in this country, by exaggerating the characteristics of Black people's facial features. Now, the day after that, the New York Times had come across other emails that were leaked to them ostensibly, in which he had made other kind of racist remarks, homophobic remarks. He disparaged the drafting of Michael Sam, who was the first gay player in the NFL draft. He mocked the hiring of the NFL's first female full-time referee, and other things like that. One thing that should not be lost in all of this is that another thing that he was found to do is he was sending photos of topless women, including two NFL cheerleaders, two Washington football team cheerleaders. And these emails came about as part of an NFL investigation into the toxic workplace environment in Washington. There are reportedly 650,000 emails that the league office has gone through. And we've only gotten so far a sliver of what's in those from what was leaked to the to the New York Times. The NFL has since been pressured to release the findings of that investigation, which it closed over the summer and said that it would not be putting into writing because of the, quote, sensitive nature of what it found. But there are a lot of questions that remain, not just of what else is in those emails, but what other people have said. A lot of the emails that we know from Gruden were sent to then Washington GM Bruce Allen, and potentially going all the way up in Washington and beyond, and beyond in the league to owner Dan Snyder and perhaps other executives as well.
Jon Gruden's obviously been around the game for decades at this stage. I think it's up on 30 years since he first got involved even in the NFL. When these revelations and these emails started to be revealed over the weekend, was the game shocked? Was his reputation pre these emails in perfect order?
I think it depends on who you ask. My initial reaction as somebody who has covered this league for going on 9 years was I wasn't shocked. This is the kind of thing you might not expect, particularly specifically from Jon Gruden, but that you hear all the time from other people. And what I wrote a column about this for The Athletic was, it's not just Jon Gruden. Jon Gruden felt extremely comfortable sending that kind of language, sending emails with that kind of language, knowing he would have a sympathetic ear, knowing that nobody receiving those emails would prick up their ears or their eyebrows, so to speak, at the kind of language he was using. I think a lot of people throughout the league recognize that it's still very much an old boys club, and there are still some of these kind of conservative notions that exist. Now, you've also had people like Mike Tirico and Tony Dungy, after the initial report from the Wall Street Journal, rush to his defense, and those tweets and those statements have not aged well since what the New York Times has reported. But I think that a lot of the times, people like to say this was not the man that I knew, or this was not the man that he was. But the fact of the matter is, the thing that matters isn't what somebody says publicly. It's what they say behind closed doors to friends when they think nobody else is listening.
David Aldridge had a good line in The Athletic. He said that Gruden wasn't some anomaly in the system. He was the system. I think which confirms what you're saying about this. In terms of the Raiders and their reaction, were they quick to condemn this?
Everybody has been quick to condemn this. I think that's, the Raiders are an organization that was built on tolerance and diversity. They have been, their reputation, their history is for being trailblazers. They hired the first ever Black coach in the NFL, the first ever woman GM, so they definitely under, late owner Al Davis have a reputation to uphold. At the same time, Jon Gruden was Mark Davis's guy. He was the guy that Mark Davis, the heir to Al Davis's throne, sought out and threw all of this money at. He wanted him to be the face of this franchise. Where I really go with this is how the players, how that locker room has reacted. Carl Nassib, who is the first active openly gay player in the NFL, came out in the offseason, came out during the summer, asked for a personal day yesterday and didn't report to practice, and was granted that personal day because this is a lot to process. He had talked about, he's only done one interview since coming out, and that was with his teammate Darren Waller, who also didn't come to practice yesterday.
Right.
And he spoke about the supportive and empathetic environment that he had experienced with teammates before he came out, that kind of helped him to come to that decision. And I can't even imagine what's going through his head when he's reading these sentiments from his coach, albeit from several years ago, and whether there's a sense of betrayal there, or that he may not have known everything that people were saying in that locker room.
I'd imagine it's creating a huge amount of questions in locker rooms around the league, in a league that has predominantly white coaches but Black players, and what's been said in public and now what's been said in private.
Well, absolutely. And, I wrote this in my column as well. The majority of coaches are still white. There are a number of assistant coaches and offensive and defensive coordinators who are Black, who people have felt for years should have been given head coaching opportunities. Eric Bieniemy at the Chiefs is a great example of that. And at the same time, I think we had talked about this several months ago, but there was a practice called race norming in the NFL in which Black players were assumed to have lower cognitive functioning as a way to deny them concussion settlement payouts, essentially. It's within the context of a league run by Jon Gruden that practices like that are allowed to be upheld. And that's why it is important. These are tangible consequences that we are talking about. That's why it's important to weed out the other Jon Grudens in the league.
Yeah, how do you go about doing that? Maybe that is already underway with these investigations. I'd imagine there's a lot of nervous people around the league. And clearly this is a systemic issue because, as you say, this almost came about inadvertently from the investigation into Washington and what was happening there. What happens next, I guess, is the question for the NFL and how they avoid further damage to the brand, because there's the moral, in situations like this, there's always the moral question and how you respond, but what really drives the reaction is the money question and sponsors and how they look at this. The NFL as a whole, as an organisation, and Roger Goodell, how has he responded so far?
Well, I mean, let's be perfectly real about this. The NFL is Teflon. The NFL's business is not going to be damaged by this scandal. It's never been damaged by a scandal like this. It has had to shift some of its practices, but so far, I don't see very strong sponsorship pressure or pressure from marketing and business partners to do anything more. I think that there's something weirdly final. People like the finality of a coach resigning amid a scandal like this without having to confront the fact that there are more of him. A lot of groups have called for the NFL to release the rest of those emails and to release the findings of its investigations. And the Washington football team reached a settlement with the cheerleaders who sued, so they've all signed NDAs. But there are other such lawsuits throughout the league from other cheerleading groups, and the more pressure that is put by media and by fans and by these groups on on the NFL to release those emails and to release its findings, that's the only way that we're actually going to see how deep this runs.
Quite often as well with something like this, you'd look at Jon Gruden and say, it's that generation, that's the way they talk, that's the way they've always spoken. Okay, they don't do it publicly anymore, but privately that's how they talk. He's not an old man though, he's 58. When you talk about working in and around the league, is it a welcoming place?
I think it depends on where you are. I really do. And I do, I don't mean this to be ageist in any way. And it is also not an excuse, because there's no age at which certain things were acceptable to say. The trope about Black people's lips is something that has been racist and damaging and part of violent imagery for 200 years now. So I don't take age as a huge excuse there. But I do think that there is a younger generation, both of players and of coaches and of management, that is coming in. And each generation successively gets more progressive. And, you saw the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers gave this great answer to this question in a press conference a couple of days ago that went viral on Twitter. And he was asked, what do you do? And he said, first of all, I want to center the people who were harmed by reading these emails and by the language that was used. And it's things like that. And I believe he's 38 years old. So he is on the younger side of things. But I do have optimism that as the years go by, as people get, more aware and just have more of these conversations, that people do get more progressive and more inclusive. And I do see that happening. I don't know if 10 years ago, Jon Gruden has to resign for these kinds of emails coming out, but that is absolutely where we are now. And that is a sign of progress.
I assume this is the end of Jon Gruden's career. There's no way back from this.
You would think. I think for the foreseeable future, I can't see an NFL team hiring him. Unfortunately, as soon as he resigned, a lot of people were throwing around names of college football programs that might hire him, and I wouldn't take that off the table. And I have to say, we talked about Tony Dungy a little bit before. We've got countless examples of people who have done the apology tour after a few years and have been welcomed with open arms, either in front offices or in league offices or in media. So I think that we might like to think that this is the end of Jon Gruden, or that would signal some kind of finality, but I don't think that history does not say that we can say that with any certainty.
Yeah, the old tearful sit-down interview coming your way in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Kavitha, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you.
Kavitha Davidson there from The Athletic. I'm sure there's plenty more to come in this story as well after that resignation of Jon Gruden. A football show